our speakers. It was really like amazing. I thought I know so much already, and I think also our more than 200 participants are actually amazed by the presentations you did, and one could really tell that a lot of years of knowledge is being accumulated in your presentations, and especially you, Mr. Schlegel, really speaking from your heart, your own experience of where the future may be headed towards to. And let me maybe a little bit summarize. Most of the questions were around the shipping options, because there is been the idea of to export green hydrogen in whatever chemical to Europe or to any other countries. So let's talk a little bit more about shipping, if you agree. Another aspect which came up again and again was safety standards, if there is a lot to do still, or if we are already having everything developed, because hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol were there before we were talking about green hydrogen. And then there are some questions in regard to reconversion of ammonia into power again, and finally about costs and your glass bowl analysis on if we will reach $1 per kg until 2030. But let's start with the shipping questions. Maybe directly with you, Mr. Renk, since you pointed it out. You said it will happen. It will happen. And you actually pointed out that ammonia will be the fuel mostly chosen. So maybe you can shed some more light on the shipping, because some participants did not actually really understand. Were you talking to ammonia as a fuel? Were you actually speaking a lot about ammonia transport also? Maybe you could shed some more light on it.
So ammonia will be one of the, if you go larger distances, as I said, over a few 1,500, 2,000 kilometers, ammonia is a perfect option for transport, not hydrogen. Hydrogen will disappear. You have to put below 220 degrees to get it liquid. So you have a certain energy transported. So, and it will disappear where the ship is going from A to B. So that's it. And the fuel question, it would be of course nice if you have an ammonia transporting ship that also runs on fuel, on green ammonia fuel. So you will have the whole chain more or less greenish. And yeah, you don't need to transport. If you produce it to bring it to the harbor, you can then transport it or then use it for ships. So if that answers your question, so it, as I said, it won't be 0 or 1. It will be the lot. And of course, you've got some challenges when you're burning ammonia, but those are no challenges that haven't been covered in earlier days, like with NOx, etc.
Is there already cost estimates? Maybe Mr. Schimmel, you could also join, about how much more 1 kg of ammonia to be transported by ship costs if we talk about distances more than 1,000 kilometers? Because ammonia shipping is already happening, as I understood.
To a certain extent, yes. And I can send you several reports calculating different stories. But there are reports calculating, especially answering this question. So it will be between 1,500, 2,000 something, I say.
Which unit are you talking about?
Kilometers. From that on, I can't give you numbers now. It's saying the ammonia has to cost X, Y, Z, and compared to others, yeah.
Mr. Schimmel, if I remember rightly, Guidehouse was actually analyzing certain studies from all over the world. You did a scoping study, checking the numbers of Bloomberg, of IEA, of any experts you could actually get hold of. Any inputs from your side? Is that going to be viable? Is shipping already happening? To which extent? And any ideas on costs involved?
So as mentioned also by the other speakers, so ammonia shipping is already happening today. It's a global commodity. but happening as an input for the fertilizer production. So shipping of ammonia to then crack it to hydrogen or ammonia as fuel would be a novel technology. And when we look at the cost, so we compared different options, so liquid hydrogen, LOHC, and ammonia. And there for LOHC, we would estimate between 0.6 to 80 to 0.8 euro cents per kilogram of hydrogen transported. Ammonia would be slightly cheaper if used as ammonia directly, so looking at 0.6 roughly euro cents per kilogram of hydrogen. If cracked back, it would be slightly more expensive than LOHC, and then liquid hydrogen would be the most costly option. So more than €1 of transport costs per kilogram of hydrogen. However, the key aspect also to note is the energy density. So when we look at a typical vessel, I mean, if I can share my screen, I can quickly show you a visualization.
Maybe one slide, intermediate question. You said around $1, so 80 euro cents for the transport of green ammonia. That is for any distance above 1,000 kilometer, or are you saying this is, let's say, each 3,000 kilometer this doubles?
So when we talk about the transport of, so I'm talking about the transport of hydrogen, so the cost of transportation using different methods. And here, when we talk about shipping, actually the variable costs are not that impactful. So mostly the investment costs. So investing in a new ship, that's what really drives the cost. So 70% are fixed costs and around 30% are variable costs. And that's the main difference to, for example, pipeline transport. For pipeline transport, it's really the distance that drives the cost because you need compression, which is quite costly. And for shipping, it's a different story. So it doesn't really matter too much whether I do 2,000 kilometers or 10,000 kilometers. There will be an impact, but not as significantly as with, for example, pipeline transport.
Please share the slide you were mentioning. And there's $1 per kg or 80 euro cents. That was not including the reconversion into hydrogen, right? So it's converting hydrogen, and once you have it, you have the ammonia, and then you ship it, and the cost for shipping. But the final product is ammonia, which would land in Europe, correct?
Yeah. If you can you see my screen?
Yes.
So this is a study that we're currently finalizing, and here we see the costs for the three different options. So here this green bar would be the reconversion of ammonia back to hydrogen. So you can see it's quite a significant portion of total costs. But if we use ammonia directly, and for example, one of the largest copper producer, Aurubis, just signed an MOU with the Emirates to use ammonia directly to replace natural gas in copper making, so we don't need that reconversion anymore. And as the other speaker said, co-firing of ammonia is also a viable solution that's being discussed right now. I'm not sure whether it really makes sense in coal-fired power plants. It could also extend the lifetime of coal-fired plant, which in my opinion is not the best option. But it could be an option to replace natural gas. So here, then it would be the most suitable option, and then liquid hydrogen would be the most expensive one. But what is also interesting is this graph here. So how much can you actually ship in terms of energy content? And especially those numbers are interesting. So if you take a typical vessel, you can ship around 330 gigawatt hours of hydrogen using ammonia. With liquid hydrogen, it's significantly less. So 60% of the energy content of ammonia. And then with LOHC, since it's very heavy, so it's a molecule attached, you attach hydrogen to a molecule, it's even, so the energy that you get at the end is even lower. So you're basically transporting carrier molecules. So this comparison is also quite interesting. You get the most energy transported with ammonia, followed by liquid hydrogen, followed by LOHC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schimmel. Mr. Schlegel, do you see these ships coming?
I mean, the ammonia ships, I not only see them on the horizon since they're there. I think for hydrogen, we've seen a prototype. If I quickly may jump one step back to answer the initial question from my point of view, since we've just finished this a large transport study for a specific project where we are developing the project and the business case for the client. So the job was actually creating a transport model, talking to all the technology providers, doing the conceptual design, and then getting actual quotes in. And I, from that point of view, Mr. Renk and I already jokingly disagreed before we started the session. I think there is a cutoff point in terms of distance. From what we have calculated and analyzed, it's quite a bit longer than 1,500 and 2,000 kilometers. So I think there's a role for liquid hydrogen, and the role for liquid hydrogen is especially there if you have shorter distances. On that word, I think we all on the panel can agree, whatever shorter may be. And if you're using hydrogen directly, if you're using ammonia in the country itself, I mean, if you're producing it, as I said in my presentation, we are producing 70 million tons of hydrogen per year. A large part of that goes into ammonia. So I think the drive for ammonia nowadays in the foreseeable future is that there is ammonia that can be used directly. And therefore, I think the ammonia shipping will be predominant in the near-term future, simply because there's a market already. The technology is there earlier. And we're not interested in the amount of green hydrogen for something else than the chemical industry that it's worth putting up a global value chain the next 5 years. I think that to me that would be the driver, and then it goes with in a medium to long-term future. It goes with the distance that you're traveling, because as Mr. Renk already pointed out, liquid hydrogen at minus 253 degrees of centigrade, you have evaporation losses all the time. But technically, producing liquid hydrogen tanks is, I was about to say, no rocket science. You may see pictures behind me. That's actually from the German Aerospace Center. And on one of these installations, there is a 500 cubic meter liquid hydrogen tank that has been standing there for 3 decades. And I've been there quite a few times. So as an engineer, I'm confident we can do it. And in the end, exactly the cutoff point for the distance and the application in the country itself will be what we will have. So to answer your question then, Mr. Winter, I see the ships coming. I see the ammonia ships coming first, and that's where the market is heading. I mean, you see tenders out in Japan for fuel ammonia, 500,000 tons a year already. So it's clear where the winds are blowing from these days. And I also see the developments and the rationale for liquid hydrogen in the medium-term future then.
Medium term, as per the presentation of Mr. Schimmel. Thank you very much, Mr. Schlegel. If I remember rightly, was 24, 25 already for liquid green hydrogen transport.
Are you asking me or Matthias Schimmel?
I think Mr. Schimmel showed a slide with the different shipping options, no? And he put some years there. So Indian participants actually want to know from when on this option may be viable. And as per Guidehouse, it seems that within 3 years we are already there. Is that right?
So yeah, that very large companies such as Maersk, MAN, but also research institutes like Fraunhofer are investigating that option. And as said, from already 2024 onwards, we could see dual-use engines on the market. So they could use either methanol, ammonia, but also conventional fuels. So it's basically hydrogen or ammonia-ready ships that will come on the market now. And as said already, methanol is not something completely new. It's been around for basically decades. Just the use is new. And the same for ammonia.
But we were also talking about not green hydrogen as a fuel or ammonia as a fuel. We were also talking about ships to actually transport the green hydrogen. So is that the same year that we see green hydrogen powered ships transporting also green hydrogen cylinders in the year 2024, or is that two different things?
No, so I was talking about ships that are powered by either ammonia or methanol. So really engines that could run on one of those two sustainable fuels. To my knowledge, so shipping or like transporting hydrogen, so not as a fuel, but really as an energy vector, that is more complicated and that is more complex. And with ammonia, it's the same. So for example, the ammonia shipments that apparently should land in Germany already this year from the Gulf countries would be transported using conventional containers. So it's not like an LNG tanker where you have LNG within the ship, but you have separate containers that contain ammonia and then is landed, for example, in Hamburg, since we don't really have the infrastructure to deal with ammonia imports at the moment, in Germany at least.
Okay, that's what Mr. Schlegel actually also said. No, it's no rocket science. If you have the cylinders, you can put them on the ship. Is that right? Or are we seeing that already?
I mean, what I wanted to say with no rocket science is building liquid hydrogen tanks, so super vacuum insulated tanks that actually are able to sustain us, let's say, boil-off rates of below 1% a day. And that's what's not rocket science. It's always difficult to put things on a ship. Everyone who's worked in a maritime environment knows it's not as simple as putting things on the ground here. So that's the challenge. And to your question, when will the ships arrive? I mean, that's up to actually the consumer countries. How serious are we? I mean, if you remember, 4 or 5 years ago, the prognosis was always in 5 years. And there the speed and the how serious the development was taken was a quite different one. But if we keep going down the path that we are going, then I think having the first intercontinental shipments in Europe within the next 5 years is not a pipe dream. But it depends.
I'd like to point out, thank you, Mr. Schlegel. Yeah, I think I would like to point out that the questions are actually coming from the audience. So if there is more questions, please just post them. Which brings us to the topic of cost. Higher costs are required for the off-takers to pay for the hydrogen being imported, or the ammonia or the methanol. So are you aware of any mechanisms, contracts of difference, H2 Global and so on, that Europe actually is willing to import these fuels at a higher price? These are questions in the chat. So for India, it would be important to know if such kind of discussions are already ongoing, if offtake is there in Europe, or if we are just like creating an artificial demand in our wish list, which is actually not there. Maybe Dr. Renk or Mr. Schlegel, Mr. Schimmel, any comment on offtake in Europe? How serious is it?
So there has been some offtake has been signed already by German or European companies from whatever Middle East or Australia. So that was last week. It was FFI from Australia. Don't ask me to whom they're delivering, but it has been signed. And if you want to follow the Green Deal, and if this has to live, we don't have an option. That's the only option we have. So green hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, etc. And you can only go down that line. Whatever renewables we've got in Europe, we won't cover the loss. So that's why. And yes, offtake is happening. And how the subsidies will develop in the future, that making those green chemicals or producing them and deliver them to a price that the client will buy it, we will see, but that has to happen as well. So that we need subsidies on that gauge.
Thank you very much for these really deep insights of the industry. Anything to add from Mr. Schimmel and Mr. Schlegel, aware of contracts of difference already ongoing?
So, I mean, yeah, you mentioned H2 Global. So that's, of course, a scheme that would offset the cost differential between conventional and the alternative. However, what we see right now, also as a result of the war in Ukraine, that fossil prices have really gone up significantly. That's why, for example, also our Ministry of Economic Affairs, Mr. Habeck, has now traveled to Norway and this week also to the Middle East to negotiate new contracts. And there we see the cost gap is really closing. If I may just give a quick example. Last year, we've talked about hydrogen cost for blue hydrogen, so hydrogen based on natural gas of around €2 compared to green hydrogen of around €5. Right now, we're talking about blue hydrogen cost of €6 and green of €5. So green is already cheaper. And regarding offtake, so I mentioned the memorandum of understanding between the Emirates and Arubis. So that's an agreed offtake already of ammonia. But then we have several instruments. I mentioned the IMO carbon levy, which is being discussed of $100 per ton. We have specific carbon contracts for the industry in Germany that are being discussed right now. So there's a lot happening on the ground. And with regards to, but we do have a competition between hydrogen shipping and pipeline options. And as already mentioned, Europe will need to import, especially Germany will need to import, and pipeline infrastructure won't be in place in the coming years. That takes a bit more time, so we expect pipeline imports to be viable by the end of the decade, but we need hydrogen and ammonia now. So that's why shipping will be an important option, especially in the short term when we're talking about the next 2 to 6 years. After that, pipelines will become a very cost-competitive option since transporting hydrogen via pipelines is more cost-competitive than shipping, especially if we're talking about distances below 1.5 to 2,000 kilometers. But for the next 2 to 5 to 8 years, shipping is the only viable option that we see.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schlegel.
And yeah, I mean, the colleagues already said it. The agreement between Fortescue and Covestro that Mr. Renk mentioned, the agreement between the Emirates and Arubis, this is happening. RWE 4 days ago, I think it was in the Handelsblatt, green ammonia terminal to be built. So the business case is at the horizon, and that's exciting. And you see where this goes to. I mean, that's why we're talking about ammonia, right? Japan, fuel ammonia already happening. Chemical industry producing ammonia, Yara, for example, fertilizer plants, ammonia happening. So it's always the sectors where you need the least subsidies, and that's how it should be, which where you can hydrogen use as a commodity, and those sectors are actively moving ahead. So, and as Mr. Schimmel said, the H2 Global is there. The Bundesregierung, the German federal government, is actively pushing this already in the talks overseas that they're having on energy imports. So there's a lot of dynamic, and the mechanisms need to be then put firmly into place. What our homework is, we need to make it attractive to consumers to have a long-term business case, but that is on the horizon.
So thank you very much for these very insightful inputs. Just to make it really clear, because the question came again and again and again in the chat. So if we talk about the logistics and the handling of either hydrogen, ammonia, or methanol, most of you or all of you would agree that ammonia is the chemical of the future when we talk about transport, or did I misunderstand?
I make
Sorry, Mr. Lenk, please.
You would say it depends. It depends.
Exactly. Consultant answer. So I'm done.
Please, Mr. Renk. Please, Mr. Renk.
No, it depends. Full stop. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, we've mentioned it. It will be a certain distance where ammonia will be the number one. There we go. And if you look at Europe, for example, then there has to be another decision, of course. The terminal that has been mentioned, that's been built on the coast. what do? Do you transport ammonia with lorries through Germany or pipelines, or you crack it and then transport hydrogen? Decision pending. I'd rather do hydrogen then, but there will be a mixture, and both will be there.
So you're speaking about both, referring to green hydrogen and ammonia. So you see, methanol terminals won't be built that much.
There will be methanol terminals as well, yes, but I reckon those mainly will be for maritime fuel. So this is what I see from the numbers coming up from the market.
Wonderful insight. Thank you very much. That brings us to the next topic, safety. So there's a lot of questions on safety. Of what you were talking about, specifically transport of ammonia, methanol, and green hydrogen. Would you say that in Europe, or mainly globally, most of the standards and norms to handle these fuels are already in place, or is there a lot of homework still to be done? Maybe Mr. Schimmel, if you could start.
I would actually give it to Matthias Schlegel on the safety aspects. I mean, as mentioned in my presentation, both ammonia and methanol are toxic. So there is a certain concern to land ammonia in cities. I mean, I've had discussions with Hamburg. They've recently presented their import strategy. And yeah, it really is a concern. And hydrogen, on the other hand, I mean, it is not toxic, but it's highly explosive. So we're dealing with substances that need to be handled with care. And with ammonia, especially, I think it was you, Mr. Renk, you mentioned the cruise ship example. That's a very nice one, since yeah, ammonia smells, and it's not a particularly nice smell. So that's the question, whether it will be accepted, especially on ships with a lot of people. Where when we talk about vessels, so for transportation, I do think it's less of an issue, but safety standards need to be aligned also on a global scale, and need to be quite stringent as well.
Okay, so for transport, there is a lot of homework still to be done, but you would say on land for storing and transport, homework is already done, or are we still need a lot of clarification? Mr. Renk.
Everything in place. Every transport ammonia is in place. I've just checked. So like 2020, 190 million tons ammonia were produced. 10% were shipped or imported. So the pipelines are in place, the jetties are in place, ships are in place, filling tanks, everything exists. Don't be scared. And it's actually harder to burn ammonia than to burn hydrogen, just by saying. So if you walk past a hydrogen leak, the explosion might occur faster than with the ammonia, and you will smell the ammonia. By the way, oil and whatever gas is toxic as well, so you don't want to have that in the ground. So all good.
Yeah, I go with don't be scared as well. I mean, if you go to a gas station, at least people not smoking there anymore, but who actually minds not using their cell phone in the explosion protected zone of a fuel station?
Correct.
I mean, we're used to it. So the engineers, and I draw the line a bit different, not in terms of transport, but it's rather industry and consumers. Industry has handled dangerous chemicals like ammonia, explosives, and hydrogen quite well over the decades. That's, I think, the engineers there can do it. What's still pending is people getting used to it, obviously, and rightfully so, and some of the standards in the consumer application. If you look at, for example, hydrogen fuel stations, there are standards that make it really difficult in some European countries to actually build a sensible fuel station. And we had a project in Italy. If you go to an Italian hydrogen fuel station, there's walls and distances like you wouldn't believe. So I'm not just to say it about Italy, we have other countries where we're doing the permitting for installation as well. So there's some things to be done. Obviously, if a hydrogen tank in a car, it's much like a compressed gas tank. There's the mechanics need to be aware, they need to have some things in mind when handling these things and repairing. So there's, I think on the application side, some things need to be done, but my final word would be just totally agree with Mr. Renk. Don't be scared. It's all doable, and we've handled these things in the past.
Wonderful statements. Let us come to the end. A lot of questions actually come back to the topic of cost of generation, and I know it's more like a glass ball thing, and it depends a lot on how big the market is going to be, what is the offtake. But there's a lot of questions on this $1 per kg green hydrogen in 2030, and a lot of people really want to know if you believe in $1 per kg of green hydrogen in 2030 or not. And if you could shed on some more light on the question when actually green hydrogen will be competitive to blue hydrogen with carbon capturing. So do you actually see that actually green hydrogen costs are going that fast down that it's not even worth it to maybe invest in blue hydrogen and directly leapfrog and think of investment in green hydrogen? What is your perspective on that? So green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, $1 per kg 2030. Is that something made up by Bloomberg, or do you really believe it's happening?
I mean, I mentioned the costs earlier, blue versus green. So right now, especially here in Europe, with the soaring gas prices, we are at around 5 to 6 euros per kilogram of blue. And also, we have to admit that natural gas all of a sudden has become a scarce resource. So I'm not sure whether it actually makes sense to convert it to blue hydrogen. I mean, it would be more efficient to use natural gas directly. And on the other hand, we see costs for green coming down quite rapidly. But I do think €1 per kilogram is highly ambitious. So we were talking about basically electricity costs below 1 cent per kilowatt hour to get to the low prices. I mean, we've seen auctions in the Middle East that are around 1 cent. So Saudi Arabia, for example. But we would also need to significantly bring down capex as well, so the investment costs. And I'm not sure whether we could really get to $1 already. And then we also have to look at, of course, the whole system costs. So we need in areas where we have very low electricity costs, such as Chile, Australia, the Middle East, we also need desalination plants, right? And we need water. So that all adds to the costs in the end. So I'm a bit questionable on the $1.
Mr. Renk.
I'm going to comment on green and blue. So there surely will be a transition phase from going from gray to blue to green, and it will overlap. And because we won't keep whatever is in the ground, because we need those, whatever methane, etc., is required to produce the amount of fertilizer, etc. And second point is that it's market depending. The US will go blue, and Russia, question mark behind it, at some stage will go blue as well. Bit delayed, I guess, but it will happen as well. So those two markets will go blue. Partially green, of course, but we will see other markets where it's mainly green. So again, it's both.
Thank you, Mr. Renk. Mr. Schlegel, are we going to leapfrog blue, or?
I mean, when we help clients develop a project, the first question usually is who's going to buy the stuff and at what price? Because that's the most important thing. You're not producing green or blue for yourselves, but for someone taking it. And if you find someone who gives you an offtake agreement, which you certainly will need at the beginning, a long-term, if you can sign a long-term sales agreement with someone willing to take hydrogen, then there you go. There you got your project. So I think that's the point. Probably I'm coming more from a commercial, from a project development angle, not from the top-down political discussion. Should we go green or blue? I think the market is so dynamic, and if companies find someone to take any kind of product and sign a sales agreement, then that project can be realized. I think earlier this year, I read a statement from the CEO of Bank of America regarding decarbonization. He said, if there's a revenue stream, the funding is infinite. And that's basically it, right? I mean, if you find someone who's going to fund your project with buying the product, then it's blue, then it's green, then it's turquoise, then it's pink, then it's the consumers will decide this. And regulation pushing politicians obviously in the direction of accepting. And we as Germany, we're going, at least I can speak for Germany, we're going quite technology agnostic right now, which is sensible if we're talking in light of the quantities that we're talking about.
If I make just one last comment, so in regards to blue, so we've seen a lot of large-scale CCS projects fail globally. Much higher costs than anticipated. Australia was mentioned previously. Those large-scale CCS projects have drastically failed. So I'm quite skeptical of blue, to be honest. And also in the US, when I talk to my US colleagues, there are two debates. There is the blue debate, but especially from California, there's also the green debates. And with renewable prices going down drastically, and I don't see that fossil prices go down drastically as well. And for blue, you need a business case of 15 years. So I'm not sure who would going to invest in carbon capture facilities if I only see blue as a transitional kind of product for the next 5 to 10 years. So that's why I'm a bit skeptical of blue still, also on a global scale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schimmel. Before we come to the final statements, if you agree to maybe give one final statement to close the session, we start with you, Mr. Schlegel.
Okay, so I think the closing statement would be like the introductory statement. The world is changing and we have a chance to actually change it at a global and at a local level. And I look forward to contributing, and I think so does everyone else on this panel. And with that, I will pass on to maybe the other Matthias in the virtual room.
Thank you, Adam Matthias. So my closing statement would be, I mean, hydrogen and derivatives such as ammonia are definitely a cornerstone of decarbonization, but they're not a silver bullet. We should still focus on energy efficiency, and direct electrification is the most efficient means to decarbonize. So where possible, use electricity directly, it's most efficient, and where not, ammonia and derivative or hydrogen and derivatives can play a role, but certainly not a silver bullet for everything. And then I would hand over to Christian.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to you all. Definitely was a good panel. I'd love to keep that discussion going. For me as well, there's little to add. The technologies are available. Infrastructures can be in place. Now there's on the politicians to decide what subsidies are on, and now it's on, and then of course on the market to react, and then it's going to happen.
Wonderful closing remarks. See you in Europe. See you at Intersolar. See you at World Hydrogen Summit. See you at the Green Hydrogen Organization General Assembly, all happening in May. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much to the audience for having been active till the very end of this session, asking so many questions. Please stay in touch. Please just get in touch with the Indo-German Chamber or my colleague Teresa Jocham. And yeah, once again, thank you very much to our speakers for their really insightful inputs from the industry directly to our Indian participants. Thank you very much, and Fir Milenge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.